back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those joining the program for the first time, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Dr. Davood Moradian. He served as chief of presidential programs for President Hamid Karzai's office and as senior policy advisor for the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Kabul. He also worked as head of the Strategic Studies Center under the Foreign Ministry. Currently, he is the general director of Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome to the Washington Outsider Report, Dr. Moradian. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
So, before we jump into the program, and there is a lot to discuss, could you tell us a little bit about your center and what kind of issues you're dealing with currently?
So our center, the Afghan Institute for Strategic Study, was established in Kabul in late 2012. So we are a 13, 14 years old organization. We were in Afghanistan till August 15, 2021, when the Taliban came. And when they came, there was not a space for me to live with them. And so we have to leave Afghanistan as with other civil society research organization in Afghanistan. So I moved back to the United Kingdom. Now I'm based in London, but also we have office in Washington. And we just had a conference recently in Washington on Jewish-Persian relationship. Our main focus is Afghanistan, but Afghanistan in a broader historical and regional context, because we believe that the Afghanistan problem is historical, is regional. Therefore, to understand the Afghan problem, we need to put it a regional and a historical context. We're focusing on Afghanistan in a broader regional and historical context.
So, in fact, that's where I wanted to get started, because we are seeing a lot of different geopolitical developments that may seem mysterious to some people. We are seeing Afghanistan all of a sudden have a military confrontation with Pakistan, neighboring country. We are seeing discussions with China that appear to have gone bad. We are seeing a lot of outreach from various factions to Central Asia. What is that historical geopolitical context that makes Afghanistan strategically important on the one hand, but also having all these confrontational relationships on the other?
I think there are two factors that have been aligned with each others. One is the geography. The geography, if you look at the map of today's Afghanistan, we are really in the heart of the Eurasia. In our northern border is Central Asia, Russia. In our eastern border is China. In the southern is Pakistan, India, and in our western border, Iran, Turkey, and the Middle East. So really all these contested big regional global powers happen to be our neighbors. But at the same time, there is also a convergence of the imperial and civilizational forces that intersect in today Afghanistan. Historically, Afghanistan was part of the Persian civilizations, and many important aspects of Persian literacy, poem, historical figures were born in today's Afghanistan. But also Afghanistan is part of the Islamic world. Islamic world, again, an important figure of the Islamic religion and Islamic civilization have link with Afghanistan. And then we have with the Hindu civilization, Hindu religions also have connection with Afghanistan, and today's Afghanistan at some point was part of the Hindu empire. So this convergence of the geography with big civilization and religious figures have all come together in a relatively small country called Afghanistan. And unfortunately, when you are a small country who attract all these big forces, it tends to produce different kind of crisis.
And this brings me to the more recent developments, which I think to some people may be surprising. After all, the current power that of Afghanistan, I won't call them a government because they're not necessarily legitimate, but they do hold power there, which is the Taliban. They've emerged from a hardliner group of mujahideen once supported by the West against the Soviets during the Cold War. And not just by the West, but by their Arab allies and also by Pakistan's ISI, which served the intermediary function in providing the Mujahideen with weapons. And for many years, even after the end of the Cold War, some of these relationships survived and flourished. And even fairly recently, Pakistan appeared to have a cordial relationship with the Taliban in Afghanistan. But we are seeing that that has now shifted. We recently saw a violent border dispute that escalated. Now they engaged in peace talks. But where is that escalation coming from? What happened that Pakistan is losing the Taliban's fealty, and the Taliban is all of a sudden reaching out to their arch enemy, India, dealing with the Russians, which is not new, but is also, given the fact that Moscow has taken up the mantle of the Soviet Union, might surprise some people. What is happening?
I think there are four historical and structural forces that can explain today's conflict between Taliban and Pakistan. The first is a religion. Islam as a religion also has been an empire experience since Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina. Islam had a hybrid identity. On one hand, a religious identity as a monastic religion, but also Islam has been an empire. And Muhammad was the first Islamic empires who established an Islamic state in Medina. And ever since, Islam has been expanding and as a state, as an empire. So when as with every other state, as with every other empire, Islamic empire also by nature is expansionist. And when you are expansionist, you are bound to produce violence. Therefore, this violence and expansion have been an integral part of the Islamic empires, starting from Muhammad as the first Islamic empire, who happened to be a religious figure here. And the Taliban really reflect that historical continuity of Islamic empire building and state building. That is the first historical and structural figures. The second is that this geopolitical element that I mentioned in my previous response, that now there is this, we know that global contest now is between China and United States, between which is Eurasia happens to be the center of that competition. Yes, and both China, Russia, United States, Iran, Pakistan, India, they are important players in this geopolitical contest, and whoever has a degree of dominance in Afghanistan can impact other geopolitical factors in the regions. So therefore, there is this Pakistan Taliban's representing a kind of a geopolitical context. The Taliban on behalf of the Iran's, Russia, and China, and Pakistan on part of United States and certain Arab states in the list. And the third historical and structural factor is about nationalism and Afghan states. Afghan state is relatively 100 years old. And unfortunately, neither Afghan state, neither nor the Afghan nationalism has been settled because the dominant factors in state building and nation building in Afghanistan have been the Pashtuns, which is one of the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan. But the Pashtuns have not been able to establish, settle an Afghan state, and they have not been able to articulate an inclusive and settled nationalism. Therefore, it is a challenge, the crisis of the Pashtun nationalism, Pashtun's failures to establish a modern nation state during last 100 years. And now the Taliban represent that the crisis of Pashtun nationalism. Taliban represent the Pashtun failures to establish a coherent nation state in geography of Afghanistan. And the fourth factor is the war economy, the drug economy. Here is that 2/3 of Taliban's economies are based on illicit sources, be the drug, being the intelligence service monies, illegal mining, and the war economy and illicit economy needs a degree of crisis. A crisis, therefore, what we see in the border area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's also an element of war economy and illicit economy. Therefore, because of these four factors, we see today's conflict between Taliban and Pakistan really reflects at least a century-old crisis in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Interesting, because the Taliban claims that they are cracking down on the drug trade and that they will be applying strict Islamic law to all of this. And on the other hand, Pakistan has tried to differentiate between the Taliban in Afghanistan and its local branches, the TPP and other related factions in Pakistan proper. How has that worked out?
No, I think again, you're absolutely right that Pakistan used to be to differentiate it, the terrorist group. The Pakistani referred to the Taliban as resistance movement when they were fighting American-led forces in Afghanistan years, and they refers to their own Taliban as a terrorist. But now, during last couple of weeks, Pakistan has started using Taliban regime, Taliban terrorists here. And unfortunately, one of the major failures of the global struggle against Islamist terrorism has been each country has tried to differentiate between good and bad terrorists, starting with United States. United States, you might be surprised to know that the Taliban are not on the U.S. State Department terrorist list. So for United States, Taliban has never been a terrorist group, but kind of an insurgent group. But for United States, Al Qaeda and other Islamist terrorists have been terrorists. Therefore, now Pakistan is paying the price of having that double standards approach to terrorism by differentiating between good and bad terrorists. But as we know, there is no good or bad terrorists. They are part and parcel of the same phenomenons.
What changed specifically that caused this latest conflict? Why did Afghanistan move away from focusing entirely on the domestic picture and their international charm offensive to fighting with the Pakistan across the borders?
Again, as I said, the very expansionist nature of Islamism.
Mm-hmm,
Many people in Pakistan, in the UK, in the US, they thought that the Taliban would be kind of a local Afghan Pashtun phenomenon. So
mm-hmm,
if they just we give them the powers in Kabul, they will be content to today's Afghanistan. So they didn't recognize the expansionist nature of the Taliban as a pan-Islamist movement here. So therefore, it is a very because they are based on Sharia, and Sharia does not recognize modern nation states.
mm-hmm,
So Sharia, by definition, it has to be universally implemented. You cannot says that from A to B is Sharia law, and from B to C it will
mm-hmm,
be international law. No, the Sharia law prevail all over international norm and laws, and the Taliban as being an Islamist movement and Islamist phenomenon, it is by nature they are expansionists. So if now they have implemented Sharia in Afghanistan, but they their religious cousin in Pakistan also they want to implement the Sharia. Therefore, the Taliban cannot says to the Taliban in Pakistan that sorry, we leave you alone because we're just an Afghan phenomenon. Because it is if they the moment they says that we leave you alone, that means that they are delegitimizing their identity as Islamist movement. And for the same reason, the Taliban could not hand over Osama bin Laden's to America after 9/11. For the same reasons, they are not able to hand over the Pakistani Taliban's to Pakistan because if they hand over the TTP to Pakistan, that means that the end of their identity as a Sharia-based movement here. So I think for people who knew the Taliban, we were not surprised. The surprise came for those who misunderstood the Taliban.
Why now? I mean, after all, the Taliban is dealing with a very difficult economic situation. It's also trying to appeal to the international community to lift sanctions, to normalize, and to look like it's a legitimate government. Why would it? What's the issue with the timing of their attacks now?
No, I think no. First of all, I wouldn't uh, characterize Taliban desperation for recognition. It has
Mm-hmm.
been mainly Western and regional desperation to work with the Taliban.
Hmm.
Because, as we see the leader of the Taliban, he has not met any foreign dignitary, so he doesn't care about international recognition because his constituency is Allah. He needs to please his divine supreme Lord, which is Allah, and enforce the Sharia. So therefore, the priority of the Taliban's leadership is not recognition
Mm-hmm.
by a secular system of the today's international system, but to implement the Sharia. So I wouldn't see the Taliban to be desperate to be recognized by the international community. What the reason that we are seeing these outbursts of the hostility between Taliban and Pakistan, because now the Taliban has become a serious threat to Pakistan's.
Mm-hmm.
1/10 of the Pakistan's territory now are under the influence of the Taliban's here.
Hmm.
Uh, as I'm sure you know, but some of your listeners may not know, that Pakistan has 4 provinces. And one of the provinces, which is Pashtun Khyber Kha, which is mainly Pashtun dominated. Nearly a quarter of that province now is under the influence of the Taliban. And now the Taliban have become a serious security threat to Pakistan's national security. So it is the response by Pakistani security and military establishment that we see the current crisis, not the Taliban's sudden decision to increase hostility towards Pakistan.
So, as we know, one of the issues that happened in the recent dispute was Pakistan targeted a particular terrorist who ultimately survived the airstrike. What was the importance of that particular figure?
Uh, I think there are 20 terrorist group, according to United Nations analytical reports, who are active in Afghanistan, and and they are protected by the Taliban, and they are shelters by the Taliban. So now Afghanistan, unfortunately, has become the international hub of Islamist terrorists here. And one of the terrorist group which targeting Pakistan's is the Pakistani Taliban, TTP, which share ideological, religious, sectarian, language, and tribal affiliation with the Taliban. So if you see Afghan Taliban and Pakistani Taliban, neither you nor me, we would differentiate between them because they speak the same language. They come more or less from the same tribal ethnic backgrounds. They were educated in the same religious madrasas here. So now there are thousands of the TTP who are now mushrooming of the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan. And the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan naturally and logically have inspired the Pakistani Taliban. And their reasoning is very simple and very rational. And they say that if the Taliban of Afghanistan, they could defeat Americans, we can certainly defeat Pakistani army, which is far weaker than the Americans' army. Now, the TTP really, they have this inspiration from the Taliban, but also logistical support from the Taliban's to take over at least a quarter of Pakistan, which is dominated by the Pashtun population.
Now they're in the middle of peace discussions. The question is why? I mean, is it really going to be effective if Taliban goals are to take over Pakistan and to spread, their ideology everywhere? Why would they need to? Why would they agree to peace talks? And why would anyone think that those peace talks will hold for anything more than, the next time they're ready to take action?
Again, the Taliban, as with many other political actors and ideological actors, they utilize every available means to pursue their objective. Back to the religious figure, Prophet Muhammad, he used peace diplomacy as part of his state building mission. Muhammad sent a number of missionary to different tribal area, and including in Africa. He came to some kind of peace negotiation agreements with enemy. Therefore, there is nothing wrong in Taliban's thinking to utilize peace as a tool to advance their tools. Therefore, and the Taliban successfully use peace negotiation with America to attain their objective. So again, Taliban are consistent in utilizing peace and diplomacy to advance their cause. The same, there is this the Taliban mediator, which is Qatar, which has been Taliban's key diplomatic partners, and godfathers. I would describe Qatar as Taliban's diplomatic godfather, and Turkey. So they have Qatar has reasons to make sure Taliban's don't become too costly for Qatar's. Because Qatar's owns the Taliban's. He invests heavily in Taliban success, and now Qatar is worried that if Taliban become too unruly, there will be implication for Qatar's. Therefore, Qatar's wants to make sure Taliban behave responsibly. Turkey has a special relationship with Pakistan. There is a kind of Islamist kind of convergence of interest between Pakistan as a Islamic nuclear powers and Turkey as Islamic powerful military and geopolitical powers. Therefore, there is a strategic relationship between Pakistan and Turkey. And therefore, Turkey needs stability between Afghanistan and Pakistan. For Pakistan also needs stability because, as I said earlier, that Pakistan misunderstood the Taliban's. Now it realized the consequence of its miscalculation about the Taliban. So there is a desperation on part of Pakistan to come to a sort of diplomatic agreements with the Taliban. But the Talibans are not desperate. They are on the winning sides. They are on the winning side because really Pakistan does not have any leverage to force Talibans to become a new or a different political actors. So, and as we saw that the peace negotiation mediated by Qatar and Turkey thus far has failed to come to an agreement, and I don't think there will be any meaningful, peaceful agreement between Pakistan and the Taliban.
Well, we've seen the Taliban reaching out to India. So would you say is that a really genuine strategic pivot, or is it a bargaining chip aimed at extracting concessions from Pakistan and from China?
I think it shows the opportunistic nature of India's foreign policy. As I know, in a diplomacy, there's a concept of statecraft and realpolitik. And realpolitik means really being opportunistic. And India has been an opportunistic players. Here's because India considers Taliban Pakistan hostility as an opportunity to weaken Pakistan. And this notion of the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So now India approach to the Taliban is based on this very opportunistic concept of the enemy of your enemy of my friends. But we know that with the Taliban's, with the expansionist Islamist movement and ideology, they don't recognize friends and allies. And the moment they take over Pakistan, Kashmir and liberating Muslim of India will be the next objective of the Taliban here. So I see here and opportunistic, short-sighted India's approach to the Taliban. And the Taliban, who doesn't want free lunch, and India's approach to the Taliban is really a free lunch for the Taliban, and Taliban's being a rational actor easily accepted that free lunch offered by India.
Do you think that India will help them with the Pakistan destabilization or takeover?
This is the calculation of India, because again, as we know that there is a kind of deep animosity between India and Pakistan during last 70 years, and India since 60 and 70s has been trying to cause damage to Pakistan via Afghanistan. Because I should have mentioned that the Pashtuns, Afghan Pashtuns, they have a irredentist claim to some territory of Pakistan. They don't recognize the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the Pashtun irredentist claim in Afghanistan has been supported by India since 60. So therefore, India sees Taliban hostility as continuation of the Pashtuns' irredentist claims against Pakistan territorial integrity. But again, sadly, India does not want to see the Islamist dimension of Taliban's threat, which will be a serious threat to India once Pakistan is pacified by the Taliban.
Here, shortly after the coup in Bangladesh, we have seen the Taliban and various regional and international terrorist organizations got together for a gathering in Bangladesh, which indicated their wider interest beyond, their own borders and their likely cooperation with also anti-Indian Southeast Asian terrorist groups. Isn't there a concern that the Taliban is going to continue this outreach to fellow travelers from various other groups?
Yeah, I think that the Taliban for Islam it is what they have been fighting for. Remember that the Al Qaeda failed to achieve its objective to establish an Islamic state. Daesh has failed to establish an Islamic states, and various Islamist terrorist groups. Their singular objective has been to establish an Islamic states. The only terrorist Islamist group that has achieved its objective is the Taliban. Therefore, the Talibans are a role model for the Islamist movement around the world. For example, the Shabab in Africa, they have named part of the headquarters after the city of Kandahar, which is the headquarters of the Taliban leadership here. The Hamas in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, that they have made reference to the Taliban as an inspiration. So now the Islamists here in the UK, that where I live here, is that there are a lot of supporters of the Taliban's among British Muslims here in the UK, because it is the first Sunni Islamist terrorist group that have established a victorious Islamic state in Afghanistan. And therefore, in Bangladesh, that would not surprise me that they are becoming popular for the Islamist circle in Bangladesh. In Central Asia, inside Iran's among the Sunni of Iran's, the Taliban's have become a very a role model for the Sunnis around the world.
Interestingly enough, HTS, which took over Syria after forcing out Assad, they are also an example of ex-terrorist groups that were just taken off the list by the U.S. who managed to take over a state, and they're now the core of the governing entity. That yes, al-Sharaa claims that Syria is going to be pluralist, but how soon till he too is meeting with the Taliban, and is that something that you see happening? The Syria Taliban coordination.
Uh, that there are a number of on the social media that uh, one of our researchers are following them is the Pashtuns, among the Pashtuns, and also among some segment of the Islamists in Syria. They have started that internal conversation between each others because uh, the Taliban are questioning the Syrian cousin that why you are compromising on your core value of establishing an Islamist state, why you have embraced Western notion of women's rights, pluralism, democratic traits here. So now the Taliban are challenging the the Syrians counterparts, and some within the Syria also are making reference to the Taliban and ask that why the Sharia is not following the model of the Taliban to be a devout Islamist and not compromise on its core values. But here there is the difference here is that the Shah's patron is Turkey, the Turkey and Erdogan. And Erdogan's they have perfected that to look Westerns but behave Islamist here. So there is this the model of Shari in Syria is Turkey, and Turkey is that really is they want to be seen as Western in the way they dress, but they try to establish an Islamic, and also there is a sectarian elements here. Is that the sectarian elements, the Shia Sunni dimension in Syria, the fact that Ashari they tries to induce the Sunni world to invest in Syria to present it kind of a sectarian agenda. Whereas the case of the Taliban, the Taliban, they do not have that sectarian agenda. They have really an Islamist agenda, and they don't need to appease the Sunni constituency. But they want to appease the Islamist constituency here. So there's some differences in the dynamic between the Taliban of Afghanistan and the Taliban of Syria.
Now, Afghanistan is trying to also play a different card, which is the fact that uh, India has investments in Iranian and Central Asian corridors such as Chabahar and the north-south transport route. You have the Gulf states looking to invest in the in various local also corridors, and also there's still a discussion about the TAPI project. To what extent will these recent developments affect these economic connectivity projects?
I think the challenge with the Taliban is that the reality of the being a governing authority and the ideological ambition. What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean? That now the Taliban are in charge of the Afghan territories, and they have to provide public services. Public services. Therefore, they have to involve in a kind of a normal state building,
Mm-hmm.
and that requires diplomatic engagement. They provide providing public goods to the Afghan citizens here. Uh, and that is the bureaucratic layer of the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
That they want to provide public services to become a normal state. But
Mm-hmm.
then the agenda of the supreme leader is entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
And that agenda is establish an Islamist polity
Mm-hmm.
to enforce the Sharia. And that is the inherent contradictions between global ambitions of the Sharia-based
Mm-hmm.
Islamist polity versus the national local requirement of the governance developmental politics. And many believe that reality of the government, reality of the real world will eventually tame ideological ambition. And the Taliban would eventually become a tame, conservative factors, players in Afghanistan. But I believe that at the end of the day, ideological ambition is far more powerful than the developmental requirement. Here's and the Taliban have no choice but to remain a pure Islamist players, and that will mean that this continue disconnecting with the rest of the world, and in terms of the making infrastructure investment, making a normal diplomatic relationship with the rest of the world, they would have to be will become the victim of the supreme leaders the global ambition. What we saw in Iran, for example, that Iran has been facing with this internal contradiction of Iran as and as Islamist powers, or Iran as a developmental state. And what is the national interest of Iran? What is the ideological requirement of the Islamic regimes? And as we have seen in important junction, Iran always has taken the decision on behalf of its ideological interests, not on behalf of its national interests. And the Taliban will follow the Iranian ayatollahs by giving a priority to their ideological interests than the national interests.
Now, we are seeing that we've heard about some of the power struggles within the Taliban. Who was fighting with whom? Who ultimately prevailed if there was an outcome? And do you expect there to be a further internal sectarianism and fragmentation that could affect the Taliban's successes in any of these ventures?
So the Taliban are really have been a coalitions during
Mm-hmm.
the insurgency. The coalition of different actors, different stakeholders who have a shared interest. A shared interest. One is this regional dimension. We had an anti-American alliance
Mm-hmm.
who were supporting the Taliban because of the geopolitical reason. That is Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan. They were supporting the Taliban on the basis of the geopolitical interests. Another element of the Taliban were the Islamists, which we saw the Al Qaeda played an important role in supporting the Taliban's, the other Islamist terrorist group in the regions, such as ETIM in China, such as IUM in Uzbekistan, such as Jumbesh al-Adl from Iran. They were the ideological cousin of, of, the Taliban. Then we had an element of the criminal network, the drug factors, and they were supporting the Taliban because of the war economy. And then we have the ethnic and the regional within Afghanistan who constitute the Taliban. So really, the Talibans were a cocktail of different actors coming together because of the opposition to Americans' presence in Afghanistan. Now, in the today's reality of Afghanistan, there are four serious challenges to the Taliban's coherence. One, as I said earlier, is this in the clash between Taliban's ideological orientation versus Taliban's normalization orientations. Yes, and is a serious the trends. Yes, there is also a regional geopolitical dimension. Qatar, Turkey, element of British systems, British element of American intelligence service, CIS, they try to bring in the Taliban into their corners. So they have invested heavily in the Taliban years. Then we have the Iranians and the Russians and element of the Chinas who try to pull the Taliban towards themselves and remains an anti-American forces. So the Americans want Taliban to become anti-Chinese, anti-Eurasians actors. The Eurasian alliance, they want Taliban to become anti-Americans forces. So there is this geopolitical pull and push affecting the Taliban. And then there is this regional clash between Eastern Afghanistan, which is the Taliban's in the east, and the southern Afghanistan, which is the Taliban. And above all, there is this anti-Talibans, which needs to be recognized that almost all Persian-speaking Afghans are against the Taliban, and they see the Taliban as a Pashtuns phenomenon. So there is ethnic dimension of the Taliban. Ethnic dimension of the Taliban that now the Persian-speaking Afghans are increasingly moving towards an ethnic confrontation with the Pashtun represented by the Taliban. So there are different forces that Taliban are navigating, ideological, geopolitical, regional, and ethnic forces. And we will see in the next 2-3 years how Taliban will be shaped because of these competing forces that shaping their behaviors.
Now, we've been hearing a lot of rumors about the growing Al Qaeda presence in Afghanistan, first from private parties and observers, and increasingly from the United Nations, underscoring that There are even rumors that the Russian GRU is training both the Taliban and Al Qaeda in camps all over the country. If that is the case, what is the danger that this alliance will become more durable and surpass what mere um, uh, host relationship that we are familiar with and become a genuine terrorist partnership with global dimension?
Uh, as I said earlier, is that imagine a typical mid-ranking Taliban's commander
Mm-hmm,
in Afghanistan. He has received a regular call from Sepah Quds, the Iranian Sepah Quds. He has a constant relationship with the Iranian Sepah Quds because, as I said earlier, the Iranians they try to cultivate the Taliban's to join Iran's axis of resistance. At the same time, now India has started approaching that uh, individuals. So that India's intelligence service has started distributing money to the Taliban's. Even Indian visas are now have become a tool for Indian's intelligence service to court the Taliban. Interestingly, as you says that the GRU also uh, uh, has established a direct means of communication with the Taliban. And what else? The CIA. The CIA also has been cultivating the Taliban's for a number of years. Now, that particular Taliban is very kind of having a multilateral foreign policy, or because it has access to CIA, to Sepah Coast, to GRU, to Iranian RAWA, and two, three other intelligence agencies. Because all these intelligence agencies, they try to cultivate the Taliban's to become their their pets, or their snakes, to throw them against
mm-hmm,
the tribal. And I should mention the China Ministry of State Security also they have established extended relationship with the Taliban. So really, what we see in Afghanistan it is a kind of it has become a hub of international terrorists, but also it has become a hub of all major intelligence service of the world who are active now in Afghanistan. And the main objective is to cultivate the Taliban's to become their allies. And as we know, the Taliban's core allegiance is to Al Qaeda. They
mm-hmm,
are not going to abandon the strategic allies, because for the Taliban, Al Qaeda is their strategic allies. The others are their tactical, opportunistic, transactional customers. Yes. But and the relationship between Al Qaeda and the Taliban is strategic. It is ideological, and also it is now they have established intermarriage relationship.
mm-hmm,
uh, uh, Mullah Omar's member of Mullah Omar's family has married one of the son of the Osama bin Laden's. Right now, Osama bin Laden's son Hamza
mm-hmm,
has married the daughter of Mullah Omar's. So there is a family connections. Yeah, yes,
mm-hmm.
family connections. So therefore, the relationship between the Taliban and Al Qaeda is ideological, is strategic, but also personal and family connection. With others, is mainly of a transactional relationship.
So it it appears that none of these foreign intelligence agencies will ultimately prevail, but they can turn this area into a minefield of um, assorted tactical clashes and intelligence operations. Surely somebody among all these actors understands that the Taliban is not ultimately a reliable long-term investment. Isn't what's the story? Do they find it this sort of tactical cooperation sufficient? Are they limited by their government's official positions? What's the point of all of this?
I mean, in my previous job with the Afghan government, I had to work with all these intelligence agents, although they represent themselves as diplomat. But we know that uh, in Afghanistan there wasn't any conventional diplomat. They're all the
Mm-hmm,
intelligence operative here. So uh, I'm afraid we have overestimated the intelligence, all
mm-hmm,
of them, from the CIA to British MI6, which they consider themselves the most sophisticated spokes. Uh, their understanding of real world is tactical, is
mm-hmm,
professional, is compartmentalized. They do not have, as a group, a broader and deeper understanding of the politics of
mm-hmm,
histories. Yes, so really, they have been trained to respond to emergency, to urgent questions. They are very good in addressing urgent issues, but when it comes to addressing the important issue, unfortunately, many of intelligence services, they are not organizationally capable of understanding important issue, and for that we see that for example, CIA has got it wrong almost all major decision. The Iranians, Pakistanis, ISI, they got it right. Even Israelis, Mossad, they got it wrong. Hamas here. So therefore, I think there is a need for a political overseeing the intelligence apparatus around the world. They have too much powers. They have, but there is little accountability on not only kind of a legal accountability, but also intellectual and
mm-hmm,
political accountability.
mm-hmm. So essentially, all of these operations largely are failing to prevent this growing close terrorist nexus that will eventually expand far beyond Southeast Asia and probably into Central Asia, into the Middle East, and eventually also back to the West, as we have seen previously. It seems to me.
No, I mean, I was in Washington a few weeks ago, and there was a, reports that, uh, if my memory helps, there are now 2,000 suspected Islamists within United States. 2,000, and imagine if only 5% of them succeeded, what would happen? So sadly, uh, uh, next 9/11 is not the question of if, it's question of when and how, and that also applies to many other Western capitals here. So, unfortunately, we lost the first round of the global war on Islamist terrorism,
Mhm.
symbolized by Taliban's victory in Afghanistan and the spread of Al Qaeda around the world. Let's hope the next round of global struggle against Islamist terrorism, all of us, Muslim, non-Muslim, become more smarter, more united, more strategic in combating this global threat.
Seems to me, though, that the political class in the US at least, but probably also in other countries, seems distracted by the appearance of internal struggles between all these elements and overlooks the bigger picture. What I mean by this, there's been a lot of talk about ISIS-K and their global reach and their alleged power rivalry with the Taliban, which the US, for instance, specifically is looking to exploit or to cooperate with the Taliban against them. On the other hand, you have, Iran and the water issues and between Afghanistan and Iran that are also have become kind of a point of both contention and cooperation. These issues are, on the one hand long term, on the other hand fairly narrow and tactical, and yet um, these elements ultimately force the US to allocate their trust and their resources in the wrong hands and towards people who are ultimately antagonistic to US interests. What do you think is going to ultimately happen with all of that?
I think there is a century of uh, tactical alliance between Western power and Islamist forces.
Mm-hmm.
And it started in today's Afghanistan. At the early years of 20th centuries, the British in India, they recruited the Pashtuns tribal militia from northern Pakistan, today Pakistan, and southern Afghanistan, and deployed them against the Ottoman powers uh, uh, by kind of starting a religious war against the Ottomans. So the British utilized jihad and jihadis at the beginning of 20th centuries against the geopolitical rivals, which was then the Ottoman powers. The same Pakistan utilized the same forces against India in 1948. In 1979, against the West, utilized and mobilized Mujahideen, the militia in Afghanistan, Pakistan, against the Soviet Unions, which we know the birth of the Al Qaeda came from the Mujahideens. And now the same Western troops now they are making this alliance with Qatar, which is provide very important supports to the Islamists, which is diplomatic respectability and financial supports. And also the confusion over the same mistake that Israeli did, that was supporting Hamas in the hope of that the Hamas would become a kind of a tame Palestinian actors would delegitimize the PLO. And as we saw it in the on October 7th, Hamas shows that it wasn't a tame animal. I think the West needs to make that a strategic decoupling from Islamism. We have had a kind of a decoupling from China, the West, but there is a entrenched mindset in Western political elite, intellectual elite, either a kind of naivety toward Islamism or a kind of opportunism towards Islamism. Really, that Islamism as a political ideology needs to be recognized as a serious threat. Primarily, it is to Muslims is a threat. Look at Afghanistan. Who is paying the main price for Islamist rule is the people of Afghanistan, the women of Afghanistan. Look at Iran. Who is paying the price of a totalitarian regime is the Iranian people. Look at the in Palestine. Who is paying the price? The people of Gaza. Therefore, I think instead of this a strategic alliance between West and Islamism, I think the alliance need to be with the ordinary Muslims, and empower ordinary Muslim to exercise the self-determination. And the vast majority of the Muslims are natural ally of a peaceful world here. So I think that a decoupling needs to happen between Islamism and the West, and a kind of emergence of an alliance between the West and the vast majority of the ordinary Muslim around the world. And I think Afghanistan is to start that realignment between the West and Islamic world.
So would you say that a lot of, leaving aside relationships where there's clearly a money factor, like with Qatar, but in all these other engagements, do you suppose that the reason why everyone keeps making the same mistake is because these policies are intelligence driven and therefore tactical in nature? In other words, what's the easiest thing? To take one armed group and go have them kill another armed group until they eliminate it, and then deal with the consequences later once that danger is taken care of.
No, no, I think it's not. I'm not advocating a regime change.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't support the
Mm-hmm.
Islamists. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as we speak, again, I want to challenge your American listeners that uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the main source of funding of the Taliban have been United States taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
United States provide $40 million on a weekly basis to the Taliban. We are the UN agency and other channels here. So I think if and when United States stop funding the Taliban for 2 months, we will have a conversation, inshallah, in Kabul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's not about arming this group against the other group. Is not empowering the Islamists for short-term gain, for tactical benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Tactical benefits, and if there's a strategic investments, that strategic investment has to be in the people of the Muslim majority, in our university, in our business, in a women's organization, in our culture, in our sports, in economy, in the trades, yes, which does not require any kind of donation, but a kind of a mutual investment opportunity for both sides. Yes.
Finally, there is, the latest development is that the Trump administration wants to get the access to the Bahrain base back. The Taliban are demanding to open an embassy in Washington in exchange. So far, that obviously has not worked out. But in the meantime, there are rumors that the Trump administration is trying to facilitate their rapprochement with India in the hopes that that will translate into goodwill and help regain access to the strategically important base. Do you think any of that is ultimately going to work out? I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm asking, do you think that's realistic and plausible?
No, again, I have learned not to predict
Mm-hmm.
uh, any geopolitical developments. So I will be humble to say I don't know, but based on the
Mm-hmm.
previous accounts and my understanding is highly unlikely we will see Americans backs to a Taliban-run Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see a problem if Americans empowers the non-Taliban groups. Why not? I mean, the vast majority of ordinary Afghans were for American presence in Afghanistan. I'm repeating, the vast majority of ordinary Afghan were for Americans' presence in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
The same that again, Iran's. The vast majority of Iranian people wants a normalized relationship with United States, with Israel, with the rest of the world. The challenge has been that the West and the United States particularly is uh, 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 interact with the elite, with the
Mm-hmm.
Islamists, rather than to engage and invest in ordinary people. So if United States engage with ordinary Afghans, with Afghan women, with Afghan civil society, with the Afghan refugee, I can see Americans return, welcome back to Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
but not under the Taliban, because the Taliban's allowing Americans back to Afghanistan it will be an ideological suicide for them. They would not ever accept it. And of course, China, Iran, Russia would not allow Taliban to come to that kind of agreement with United States.
Now, if the US is ever forced to return to the Afghanistan as a security measure, what do you think they should do differently from what happened previously? After all, the argument that the Trump administration sold to US Congress to put an end to all the operations was that the American people were tired, that there was a lot of corruption, financial mismanagement, that the Afghan government was corrupt, that the people couldn't, that the opposition was fractured and self-interested and was not willing to stand up to the Taliban, and so on and so forth. So, what would be the way to overcome these arguments in any future situation where the US realizes that the current status quo is not sustainable?
No, I think they're all the symptoms of the corruptions, all issue that you mentioned. They were the symptoms of the bigger problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first Americans made the two strategic mistakes and miscalculation in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
One, that it did not recognize the Taliban as a terrorist Islamist
Mm-hmm.
group. It treats the Taliban as a kind of a bunch of illiterate tribal militia here.
Mm-hmm.
So the Americans did not take Taliban seriously. The second miscalculation of United States was to allow Pakistan to double play Americas.
Mm-hmm.
If I mean, President George Bush was clear that, I mean, we have to credit him for his strategic clarity. But people like Zalmay Khalilzad, because of his ethnic affiliation with the Taliban, did not allow Americans to see the Taliban as a terrorist group. So if America treat the Taliban as a terrorist group from day one and fight with them seriously, we will have a different outcome. The same that if America was consistent with Pakistan, that the Pakistan need to choose between America or the Taliban's. Again, in this, the British came. The British somehow misled Americans by allowing Pakistan to be treated as sometimes as allies, sometimes as enemy here. So they feel really, if America was serious with the Taliban and with Pakistan's, we will be a different world now. Now, for the way forward, again, the same thing. That I think that Afghanistan should be seen as the ground zero for defeating Islamism globally. And that has to be the singular objective of United States, that no longer it's any kind of justifications for any type of Taliban in Afghanistan, and the same kind of strategic clarity with Pakistan and other factors, that either they have to be on side of American interests or on the side of terrorists. They should not be allowed to have a double games with America.
Well, what should be the objective in the future? Because there was never a clear objective to the quote unquote endless war in Afghanistan. Eventually, of course, obviously the Taliban were displaced, the US was maintaining security presence, but there was never a clear objective in terms of at what point can Afghanistan take over self-governance, at what point is the threat considered to be eliminated sufficiently that it is no longer How do you make these objective determinations? How do you
Again, and
what
that is another problems of the Western thinking, that the
mm-hmm,
politics, you cannot objectify.
mm-hmm,
It's not a natural science that you can quantify a matter of war and peace and politics. There have to be different criteria.
in other words,
Different.
you're saying that Afghanistan is a politically strategic goal and not just a matter of military victory.
No, exactly that. Kind of this. Uh, I was asked these questions by my American
Mm-hmm,
colleagues when I was in Kabul. What is the end state? And I said that end states is a philosophical question. No one has an answer to that end states here. So we are not talking about building a shopping mall.
mm-hmm,
Uh, a shopping mall, that you need to have a certain benchmarks, certain timelines, then you can hand over. It has evolving process. It is
mm-hmm,
evolving process. Secondly, we live in a Pax Americana. I mean, for example, South Korea. In context of the South Korea, they don't ask when South Korean will be self-sufficient. It will never happen. The moment American troops leave South Korea, next
mm-hmm,
week North Korea will invade South Korea.
mm-hmm,
Again with Europe's. The moment Americans leave NATO, next month Russian tanks will be in Warsaw, even in Berlin here. So I think this objective of Afghanistan to become a self-sufficient was unrealistic,
mm-hmm.
because
So it
if
should have been seen as part of security architecture.
exactly, there has to be as with the same of the every members of Pax America, that
Mm-hmm,
it should be kind of a continuing case. Of course, I think what we have in Afghanistan, kind of benchmark was that to to change Taliban from a national threat
mm-hmm,
to states to a local threats to a local threats, and then that local threats uh, uh, further reduced from a terrorist-centric threats to a matter of law enforcement threats, a kind of a gradual reduction of the threats. But always we recognize that threat will be there.
mm-hmm,
Will be theirs, because, as I said at the beginning, Afghanistan happened to be in a very volatile part of the world. So here is that, and therefore, I think the objective of America too in Afghanistan should be redefined differently, not on the kind of quantifiable measure, but mainly of the political measure. For example, the ability to have a reasonable presidential election,
mm-hmm.
that should be one of the benchmark. Not a perfect election, because as we saw even in the United States, there is not, I think, the perfect election, but a kind of a reasonable uh,
Mm-hmm.
election. So that was another benchmark that would present that as a kind of the measurement of success in Afghanistan. Therefore, I think the criteria has to change from quantifiable concept to more political basis and concept.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, and I think again, despite everything else, I think that we have saw Taliban too. Most likely, we will see America too in Afghanistan, and
Mm-hmm.
let's hope the America too become more smarter, more patient, and more strategic
Mm-hmm.
than. America first.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for this for these insights. I think it was a great feedback on the current developments, which may seem confusing to people, especially the ones who thought that once U.S. withdraws from Afghanistan, all our troubles are over. Some of us have learned that that would just actually be the beginning of a more and far more dangerous and more globalized um, threat network, and that's exactly where the direction it seems to be taking. And hopefully, having these discussions that are honest, meaningful, and realistic will help shape the discourse on these issues beyond very simplistic, paradigms that we've been presented by our political leadership so far.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to many future conversations.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back next week, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. The Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Have a good evening.
Thank you.